Welcome back, boys and girls, to another My Hero Academia collectible card game deck profile. This one is going to be a little bit different than the previous ones that I have done. This one is going to be focusing on this guy right here, Minoru Mineta number 2. And normally I would just show you a cool deck that I think is really good. And while I do think that this deck is really good, the primary focus of this video is for me to basically sound the alarm on what this leader actually is. I think Minoru Mineta 2 is a gatekeeping leader in the Set 2 Crimson Rampage format. What do I mean by that? I mean that if your deck is not prepared to play against this character, especially from, say, game 1, you're gonna have a bad time. The character is very easy to pilot and very powerful at doing the things that he is trying to do, which means that naturally, as this deck gains more infamy in the earlier parts of the Set 2 metagame, there will be more people playing him, therefore you will see it more often. And a lot of the standard decks, the decks that are being built the same way that they are in Set 1, simply are not up to the task of playing against this character. So I'm going to show you guys a variation of the deck, using a list that my friend Will has constructed. This is my kind of take on his version of the list to kind of go through the deck and show you why I think it's a really powerful deck. And then we'll talk at the end about some of the ways that we can actually deal with it. So, for those of you who are not familiar, it is Minoru Mineta 2. He is a 5-hander with 31 life. His symbols are Death, Evil, and Water. He has Enhance once per turn. Your rival adds 1 foundation from their stage to their card pool. If it's your rival's turn, they may build the top card of their deck face down. So essentially, the first time on either player's turn that there is an Enhance step, the Mineta player will make you add 1 of your foundations to your card pool. On his turn, that essentially means you lose a foundation every time he enters combat for the first time on his turn. On your turn, you will get a foundation back. However, it is a blank foundation. So essentially, you lose a foundation on each of his turns, you flip a foundation on each of your turns. And that puts a lot of pressure not only on your stage and, denies you specific foundations that you may need over the course of a very prolonged game, but it also makes it so that you get +1 progressive difficulty for the rest of the turn unless you have a way to navigate around that. It is very difficult for a deck, say, like maybe All Might 3, in order to execute his game plan, because you will try to open with a punch to lead into a Texas Smash, and he will simply gunk up the card pool, and therefore you cannot actually get off your combo. It is very cost prohibitive for you to actually go for a Texas Smash against him, because the earliest time that you'll be able to actually execute a combo is on the 4th card in your card pool, which can cause you to overextend and lose games. So this is a really annoying and powerful Enhance skill. But it doesn't stop there. He has a second Enhance. Discard 1 momentum, reduce this attack speed to 0, then draw 1 card. This is really important for how the way the rest of the deck is built. For every attack that Mineta deals damage, it's going to turn into an extra card in his hand, and it will make it trivially easy to block whatever attack you have. So essentially, he is a 5-hander, but he is essentially going to be maybe a 7 or 8-hander each rotation, depending on how many attacks he actually lands in a given turn. And that's going to lead us into the offensive package, which we'll talk about, and then afterwards we'll talk about the defensive package and foundations and things like that. So, taking a look at the actual offensive cards in the deck, you will notice this deck plays a surprising amount of throws. Disregard the 2 blanks. Obviously, I do not actually have access to 4 Great Rushes at the time of filming. But yeah, this deck plays a lot of throws, because throws are almost guaranteed to deal damage, which means they will get to become momentum, and therefore you will essentially always get to draw a card and be able to easily block the attack. So let's talk now about each of these throws. The first of which is going to be Sticky Ball Toss Tackle. It is a 4 difficulty with a 3 check. It has a +3 mid block. It is a 3 mid for 3 damage. It is a Fury attack with throw. Fury is kind of important because people still do play Bonds of Friendship, and you can use that to reduce the damage of this throw. Enhance, this attack gets +1 damage for each card in your rival's card pool. This is obviously going to be really, really good with the first enhance on Mineta. You are essentially going to almost always get access to an extra damage. And then obviously if the turn has gone on long, and this is say the third attack, and they've blocked all of it, then you're going to get more damage there from that. It also has enhance lose 2 health. If this attack is not blocked, your rival commits 2 foundations. So you could force them to actually have to block this, which sets up for other attacks that are in the deck. Basically guarantees gets a card in the pool, because otherwise the next attack is basically going to be unblockable when you use this correctly. So again, goes really, really well with that annoying strategy. Next up, we have 3 Grasping Tape Toss. It is a 5 difficulty 3 check, plus 3 mid block. It is a 2 mid for 5 damage. It is a ranged attack, which is important. It has stun 1 and throw. It has enhance. If this attack is not blocked, you commit one of your rival's foundations. Again, it forces your opponent to have to block the attack and therefore put more cards into the card pool for things like your sticky ball toss tackles, as well as tongue whip, which we'll talk about later on. It also has a deadlock enhance. Add 2 rival foundations to the bottom of their deck. So that obviously can come into play if your opponent is trying to play a long game. Deadlock is really important for both you and your opponent, because the nature of how this deck works is it is very difficult for your opponent to actually execute an offensive game plan, which means that the game will go very, very long on their end. And this deck is primarily a lot of throws, which means it's just a chip deck. It's just trying to slowly whittle you down. It does not have a ton of offensive power. One of the reasons I'm calling attention to this deck is because it takes so long for the first game of Mineta to resolve that if you are not properly prepared to play against it, then you will almost assuredly lose the match 1-0. So yeah, that is going to be Grasping Tape Toss. The final throw is probably the most dangerous one, and that is Grape Rush. It is a 5 difficulty for a 3 check with a +1 mid block. It has 4 speed and 6 damage. It is a Fury attack with stun 1. Enhance. If your rival has at least 1 card in their card pool, you get to draw a card. So it cantrips itself. You will always get a card back when you play this actual attack. The other, more dangerous enhance is Mineta Enhance. This attack gets +2 damage and gains throw. Only playable if this attack has its speed below its printed value. Well, you can use your second enhance on your character to reduce this to 0 speed, which means it is reduced below printed, and therefore you can turn it into a throw. So as long as you have momentum, you will have access to making this a throw. There are also a number of foundations under the water symbol, which allow you to reduce the speed of attacks, meaning that this is almost always an 8 damage throw with stun 1 that cantrips. So yeah, this thing, really, really powerful attack in the deck. So there you go. With having access to 11 throws in the deck, that's half my attack lineup, I am almost assuredly going to have an abundance of momentum when playing Mineta, which means I almost always have access to that speed reduction on him, which means that we have access to some very powerful attacks that also function incredibly well as blocks. The first one to talk about is Cheerful Uppercut. It is a 5 difficulty with a 3 check with a +2 mid block. It is a 5 speed low for 4 damage. It is a charge punch. Discard enhance, discard 1 momentum. This attack gets +4 damage. Now the main reason you're playing it though is this response. Response, after you block with this card, both players add the top card of their deck to their card pool face down. So essentially, you will force them to pass their turn by using blocks that make it really difficult to continue the turn. So you debuild them with Mineta's Enhance and make them put a foundation. Then you block with this attack and then add another card to their card pool. So at this point, they're already having 3 cards in their card pool when they've only really played 1. And then obviously there are going to be foundations like sticky balls here that we'll be talking about in a little bit that can make it so that there's 4 cards in their card pool, which makes it incredibly taxing for somebody to do anything, especially if it's like the second turn of the game. So that's why this card is here. And it by itself is a reasonably statted finisher. It can be like an 8 damage low with a decent amount of speed. The other card that can function as a finisher that is very good as a block is Ice Storm. Ice Storm is a 4 difficulty for a 3 check with a +2 mid block. It is a 4 speed low for 4 damage. The primary reason we're playing it is because it has Breaker 2. It also has Powerful 3 and Ranged if you want it, but the Breaker 2 is the primary reason we're playing this attack. You essentially have them play an attack, you put the foundation in the card pool with Mineta's Enhance, so they now have 2 cards in their card pool, and then you block with Ice Storm, or you sticky balls them and then block with Ice Storm and make it so that their turn is basically done, because at that point you're going to have either a +4 or +5 difficulty on anything that you play in your card pool. This attack also functions as, you guessed it, a fairly good attack. It has Enhance. This attack cannot be blocked by attack cards. A lot of the really good blocks that are low in the format are actually attacks. A lot of foundations that are lows are usually at like a +3 block zone, so that is obviously relevant. And again, it has this deadlock. This attack gets +2 speed, and its speed cannot be reduced further. So yeah, really, really good attack overall. If you've been paying attention to the format in the last like month or so from set 1, you already know how good this attack actually is. It's just well-rounded at all points of the game. It's great defensively, great offensively, and it has something like a deadlock threat, which your opponent will be threatening deadlock a lot, because the general inclination on how to get past all of your card pool clog is to want to build incredibly wide, so that way the Enhance that puts cards in the card pool doesn't affect you as much. So having a lot of deadlock threats is really, really good. The last attack in the deck is 4 copies of Tongue Whip. It is a 4 difficulty with a 3 check with a +2 low block. That low block does matter because this deck, one of the big weaknesses of it is that it does not have access to too many good highs or low blocks. It just has a lot of mid blocks. It is a 4 speed low for 4 damage, and it is a ranged attack. Enhance, this attack gets 1 damage for each card in your rival's card pool. Oh look, all of those throws that we had earlier, they force our opponents to block and put cards in the card pool in addition to our Enhance, which means that this attack is going to get pretty big if it's the 3rd or 4th attack we play in a turn. It also has Enhance, add the top card of your rival's deck to their card pool. So this again lends itself to the strategy as a finisher or a poke. It is just very difficult for your opponent to actually block, say, a string of 2 of these in a row, because you've already added cards to their card pool. And again, you can forcibly add stuff with things like sticky balls. So this attack, I've seen it get pretty beefy. It can get to like +5 or +6 in this deck very, very easily. So it is kind of like a finisher or like a mid-game poke for a decent chunk of damage. If you, for some reason, do not like it, you can replace it with another throw and kind of stick with that generalized game plan. So now you guys know what the attacks look like in the deck. Let us now talk about the foundations. And the first one I have to talk about, because we've referenced it multiple times at this point, is Sticky Balls itself. It is a 3 difficulty 5 check with a +2 mid block. It has unique, so you can only have 1 in play, but you don't really care because one of the enhances is going to flip this face down, which means the other ones in your hand become live. It has Enhance, flip, add the top card of your rival's discard pile to their card pool. So essentially, you're going to flip it and therefore make it so that it's very, very difficult for them to continue their turn. Between the first Enhance and Sticky Balls, you pretty much should have it so that their turn is going to end either after 1 more card or 2 more cards. So this card is very, very annoying in this deck because it does exactly what the character is trying to do. He's trying to make it so prohibitively difficult for you to actually execute your game plan. The other Enhance is pretty good as well. It has Enhance, Commit. This attack gets -4 speed as long as it's not a ranged attack. So overall, really powerful card, and again, it lends itself super, super good to the actual deck. You can play 4 if you want. I'm playing 3 because I don't want to see it like a ton for the most part. Next up is Gotcha. It is a 0 spam with 5 difficulty for a +2 low block. It has Response. After this card is committed during the Enhanced step, this attack gets +1 or -1 speed, playable while committed. It's here for 2 major reasons. It has a low block on a spam, which we need more low blocks in the deck, and 0 is pretty much as good as we get. And then also, Water has no real stun hate. One of the big drawbacks of this deck is that it will die to a deck with a lot of stun on it. It's one of the ways you can absolutely cram through a bunch of damage. So having the Gotcha in the deck means that if they stun to you off of, say, a back alley haymaker, you can reduce it to 2 speed, and it makes it much, much more easy to block. And that attack is a mid, and I do expect it to see a fair amount of play. So this should mitigate the speed on it and make it very, very easy for us to block and get Breaker or things like Cheerful Uppercut, and therefore we don't have to waste the momentum on our Enhance if we do not want to. Next up is a card that I think is a staple in this deck, which is Surviving the Final. It is a 0 spam with a 5 check. It is a +3 high block. Enhance once per turn, this attack gets -1 speed. The reason why I think it's a staple attack is it basically can be used as a way to trigger Grape Rush without actually having to pay momentum. On top of that, it's just a really good zero foundation in general because it gives, again, minus speed, so it makes it easy for you to block stuff and trigger things like Breaker or Cheerful Uppercut without having to spend momentum. In a similar vein, we were playing 4 copies of Ice Gliding. It is a 1 difficulty with a 5 check with a +3 mid block. Enhance, commit. This attack gets +1 or -2 speed. If it's blocked, the next attack gets either +1 speed or -1 speed, your choice. So this can be used to not only reduce the speed of your Grape Rush, but reduce the speed, obviously, of your opponent's attacks. And then you can use it also to juice the speed on your things like Tongue Whip, for example, or Cheerful Uppercut if you need them to actually go for game. Next is Tape. Tape is huge in this deck. You really, really need this card. It is a 1 difficulty for a 5 check with a +3 mid block. It has Enhance. Change this attack's zone to mid by flipping it. That is really, really important, by the way, because this deck is primarily mid blocks, and your best mid blocks add cards to their card pool or have Breaker. So by having Tape in your deck, you can very, very easily cause them to run into a Breaker without really harming your life total. It also has a flip to give a mid attack -2 speed, which doesn't really come up all that often, but you could use it. Its primary use is to turn attacks to mid because, again, water as a color doesn't really have the best high blocks. They do have a lot of low blocks, but we're not really playing a lot of the ones that are in the color because they're really high cost, things like Rescue Completed. Next up is Struggling with Studies. This is actually a tech that my friend used, and I actually think it's pretty decent. It is a 1 difficulty with a 5 check with a +3 low block. It has Enhance, Flip. If this is your rival's 3rd or greater attack this combat phase, add 1 card from your card pool to your hand, and it has Response. Before one of your foundations would be flipped due to a rival's effect, you flip this card instead. So this is really good because it's protection from causing you to flip stuff. If you're playing against an Earth deck, they can try to flip a bunch of your foundations, or even like Death, something with Apathetic. You can use this as protection to protect a specific card like Sticky Balls, for example, or like Wall Cling, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. So that's obviously really, really nice. It does have that low block that we're looking for. And then obviously the flip is really, really good as well because your opponent is going to try to play these really prolonged turns later on because they're going to get frustrated and want to start trying to attack you for a ton of damage once they've built up enough foundations. They're going to try to force through as much damage as they can. So if you block their 1st or 2nd attack with an Ice Storm and they keep trying to force it, you can use this Enhance on their 3rd attack and pick back up Ice Storm and go, hey, you're for sure passing after this attack. So it's very, very taxing and very difficult for your opponent to play a long string when you have a card like this in your your stage. So yeah, really, really, really good card. Next up is Wall Cling, because one of the best ways to try to fight fire with fire is to play an all throws deck against Mineta and then try to play the long game against him if you have some kind of life gain. You play all throws with things like Excited for Blood, so having access to Wall Cling is super important. If you don't know, 2 difficulty, 4 check, +3 high block, Enhance, flip it. This attack, if blocked, deals no damage, so it gets around things like Jolt, like the Ochako deck that we just talked about. It's one of the ways it can deny momentum from other throw decks and keep our life total high. It's also a high block, and Water just historically has pretty bad high blocks, at least from the set 1 meta. Next up, we have CreepyRealization. It is a 2 difficulty for a 4 check with a +3 mid block. It has Enhance, Commit. This attack gets +1 or -1 damage for each card in your rival's card pool. Well, you gunk up their card pool pretty good by adding things to it with things like Tongue Whip or your obvious Enhance to debuild them. So this lets you cash in on all that in the later stages of the game for big damage. One of the other ways that people try to deal with Mineta is to play a lot of prolonged strings, something like, say, a Staff Strike turn, because they're just like, okay, once I get his debuild out of the way, I just have to go super, super long against him, and I could finally punch through for a bunch of damage. Well, if you have 2 Creepy Realizations in play, that becomes incredibly difficult. If you've noticed so far, most of the foundations in this deck are either to turn on our throws or make it exceedingly difficult for our opponents to actually execute their game plan, especially the 2+ cost foundations. So yeah, you guys probably already know from seeing the set 1 meta how stupid this card can actually get. Next up here is 3 copies of First Villain Encounter. It is a 2 difficulty for a 5 check with a +2 high block. And I'll be honest with you, the main reason to play the deck is the +2 high block. It has Enhance, Commit. Your attack gets +1 speed and +1 damage. Your next ranged attack this turn gets -1 difficulty. So this is really, really good because it pumps the damage of any attack in the deck. So you can have a couple of these in, commit them out for a bunch of speed and damage on a throw to kind of force through a specific breakpoint if you so choose, and then obviously give the minus check to the next one. Of all of your throws, only Grasping Tape Toss is ranged, so this does reduce the cost of Grasping Tape Toss, so you can essentially play 2 5-cost throws in a row if you so choose with it. The other main reason to play it is its Deadlock Enhance. Your rival adds 2 foundations from their stage to their card pool. Again, the natural inclination of your opponent against this deck is to just build an absolute ton of foundations in order to circumvent the fact that they're going to be losing one every turn. If they somehow mess up and the game goes long and they go into deadlock, you can punish them really, really hard with this card, as well as Tongue Whip. Next up is 2 copies of Irrefutable Force of Nature. It is a 2 difficulty 5 check with a +3 low block. It has Enhance, Commit it, seal 1 rival Earth, Fire, or Water asset or foundation, or remove it from the game as another Enhance to seal 1 foundation or asset. Really good because it turns off things like your opponent's Creepy Realizations or your opponent's wall clings, things like that. A lot of cards that people are using defensively to get out of situations are really good. If your opponent, you notice, doesn't really have that many cards in their hand, you can seal their Passing the Torch and force them, for example, to try to block your stuff and then kill them with a Tongue Whip at the end. So it is a role player in the deck, and it's worth playing at least 2 copies. And then the final card in the deck here is 3 copies of Frozen. It is a 2 difficulty 5 check with a +2 high block. It has Enhance. During your turn, you can destroy 1 foundation. Your opponent commits 1 foundation of their own. So the main reason that it's here is obviously it's going to be this +2 high block, but it's also a way to keep you out of deadlock. You, just like your opponent, will take the game long, and you will get into situations where you might go into deadlock. Having a copy of this in your stage makes it a lot harder for you to go into deadlock and allows you to force through damage a little bit easier. So yeah, I really do like having Frozen in the deck for that reason. So that is the basic deck in a nutshell. As you can see, it plays some very, very annoying cards. Definitely sleeve it up and play it against whatever decks you actually have, because again, I do think that this is going to be like a gatekeeping deck in the format. If you are not properly equipped to deal with this, because he has a lot of life and he's going to make it really difficult for you to push through damage, you're going to be in for a bad time. You don't want to be playing a 45 or 50-minute game 1 against Mineta. You need to have some kind of game plan in your main board, or you need to have some kind of sideboard option for him, and when you see him, just concede game 1 immediately and then try really, really hard to win the second and third game in a match. Time is really, really important when you're playing against this guy in tournament. You want to be aware of how long each game is lasting, and if you don't think you have a way to actually squeeze out the W, there's no shame in actually conceding the game and going to the next one if you think it will allow you to have a faster match in the future. So a couple of things you can do, obviously, is in game 2 here, you could go Mina Ashido 2, because her static ability means that face down cards in your card pool do not affect you. In fact, they give you bonus damage. So she is an option for you to try if you want. Other ways you can get around it is obviously Momo is very, very good against this deck, because she just simply adds cards like Rising Starlet to her card pool and then immediately builds them back down with her character ability, which allows her to get free advantage. So she has a fairly good matchup as well against Mina. For other characters, you can play an attack like Exploding Pride, for example. It is a 4 difficulty with a 3 chuck +2 high block. It is a 4 low for 3 damage, Fury ranged attack. Enhance, your rival loses 1 health for each card in their momentum. They cannot reduce their life below 1 with this effect. So obviously, if your opponent has hit you with a bunch of throws in Mineta, they're going to have a bunch of Mineta momentum, which means that Exploding Pride is going to get through for some free damage. But the primary reason to play it as your first attack in a turn, after he gunks up your card pool is Enhance. If this attack is blocked, you discard all cards from your opponent's momentum, which means that this guy just goes back to being a generic 5-hander, and he's a lot easier to deal with. Even if he gunks up your card pool, odds are he's not going to be able to block a whole string of lows or a whole string of highs, because remember, the deck is primarily mids, and the color just simply doesn't really have access to too many great highs or lows unless they drastically restructure the way that the deck is played, in which case then their matchups in general become easier to deal with. So this is another one that I think more people should start playing for sure. Really, really good attack. And then the final card for all of you aggro players out there is Capture Evildoers. It is an action, 2 difficulty, 5 check with a +1 mid block. It has Breaker 1. It has Enhance, remove one of your rival's momentum. If you do, you add the top card of your deck to your momentum, then RFG this card. So obviously very good for picking apart his actual momentum. But if you have a handful of gasoline, you can start on an attack, and he can add a card to your card pool with his Enhance. And then as your next form, you can essentially discard up to 3 cards from your card pool. So you'll play an attack, he'll add a foundation face down. So like say you go like this, he adds a card. All right, cool. This attack is finally resolved. We come back, we play Capture Evildoers on a 4. We scoop all these cards out of the card pool, and now we proceed with a fresh turn with a handful of cards like, say, Back Alley Haymaker or whatever have you, and just try to force through a ton of damage, assuming that he doesn't have too much momentum. So yeah, there are ways to deal with the deck. You just have to be cognizant that the deck actually exists first and foremost, which again is the primary reason I'm making this video. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this deck profile as well as some of the tech options against him. Let me know down in the comments below what your strategies are against Mineta. Have you played against this guy? If so, do you think he's super good? Am I like overinflating his value in the format? Yeah, so love to hear from you guys. Give me a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and want to see more content like this. And as always, enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and I'll catch y'all later. Bye-bye now.